Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After the calling off of the Imola Grand Prix, many questions have been raised as to when the major upgrades we expected from multiple teams this weekend, especially Mercedes, will actually arrive. Mercedes have confirmed they will bring their brand new cars to Monaco in just a week or so's time, rather than waiting for Spain, which would be ideally a far better testing opportunity. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Few updates as well. I just missed this footage actually in yesterday's video of the this is remarkable, right? This is an image of the paddock here. The actual Formula 1 side of the paddock kind of got away a little bit without too much flooding, but some of these images are remarkable. Now, today it's in a much better condition. The water level has lowered quite significantly. I'm sure that there, even in terms of the ground underneath the track, I'm sure there might be some questions there in terms of ensuring that it's all okay for when they do go racing there again. It won't be Formula 1 though, so the teams have been allowed, I believe, back into the paddock today to clear up and ensure everything's okay. I don't believe there'll be any damages to at least the Formula 1 side, because I believe their paddock was higher elevated, right, and they were able to get away with it. I'm a bit concerned about Formula 2, whether any of their, there's any damages, right? I'm sure there's insurance and stuff, but it's obviously not ideal. So it's obviously a much better day, even a bit sunny today. Apparently the weather is dry, but obviously this race wasn't cancelled because it's going to be wet on Sunday, which it may not be, and therefore the FIA didn't like it. It was cancelled because the fire support, the helicopters and everything that is necessary from a local community perspective to run an event like this are much better served helping the relief effort which is ongoing in Emilia-Romagna. All around a rather impressive response, I think, from Formula 1 that deserves credit, cancelling it this quickly so it's very clear for the fans what's going on, not doing at Australia 2020, for example. And also it's been very quickly confirmed that indeed all the people who bought tickets, the fans, will be able to either get a full refund or exchange their ticket for next year's Grand Prix and come back next year instead. So also hopefully those that booked flights and hotels, whether they can claim anything back on that or whether there's something else to be done. So anyway, that's the update on that side of things. There also has been some questions as to whether the drivers could, as they did during the COVID era in the pandemic, try and do some sort of virtual Grand Prix, as was suggested last night by many people. What about if the Formula 1 drivers, as many as possible, came together, did this virtually to, and also, well, sell tickets, not really sell tickets, but people could donate, right? It would generate some money that could go towards relief for the area. So hopefully that could be the case. And actually, Team Redline, so Max Verstappen was live on Twitch last night, and there were many discussions in the chat about this exact possibility. And Team Redline, who Max drives for in the sim racing side, they're connected to Red Bull. They tweeted this out just a couple of hours ago now. Italian flag, controller, eyes emoji, stay tuned. So they're trying to cook something up here in terms of making it happen this weekend. Whether it can or will, or how many drivers could get involved, I don't know. But if many of the drivers that have done this in the past are interested, that would be a really cool thing to see if we can kind of get a Grand Prix, even if it's virtual this weekend, online, and help support those that really need such support in the area as it stands. One of the big questions though from a Formula 1 perspective is which teams does this benefit and which teams does this potentially harm. You could argue that Red Bull won't be super happy just because they're dominating the season. This was a great track for them last year. They 1-2'd and pretty much took every single point available over the entirety of the weekend. I'm pretty sure it's 1-2, right? Because Leclerc was chasing Perez at the end, and then he had a bit of a spin, put it in the wall, but Verstappen certainly won. So given Red Bull's current dominance, they would have thought, oh, you know what, we could have got another 1-2 there and extended the advantage. Fundamentally though, Red Bull are going to win anyway, the championship that is at least. I do wonder whether Verstappen or Perez will be happier, if anyone, because Perez might think, well, it's one less chance of me to catch up points on Verstappen, but the gap is so minimal anyway that it's probably not going to matter over the course of the season. And Verstappen was, compared to Perez, very strong there last year, and is a circuit, it's not a street circuit, right? Probably should suit Verstappen better, so maybe there's part of that, but I don't think for the Red Bull guys it really matters too much. The downside for some of the other teams though that were bringing upgrades is that Imola is a perfect opportunity for teams to, well, test things out. This is the track layout itself. You've got that pretty fast chicane in the first sector, then another couple of fast corners, 5, 6, into a big traction zone in turn 7, another few fast corners in 9 and 10, another traction zone out of 13, another traction zone out of 15, and then out of 18 down to the long straight. So there's a good mix here at Imola. It's kind of a very traditional circuit, right, of some slower corners, some faster corners, a long straight as well with DRS to really get a good picture in terms of what the straight line speed is looking like, some important traction areas, some, front limited parts as well. So it gives you a reasonable picture of how your car is performing, and therefore would have been a rather ideal event for many teams, let's say Mercedes, to arrive with their upgrades so they can have 3 hours of practice time to see how they work and get all the benefits they have out of that. Okay, this setup gives us this advantage, this setup gives us this advantage. Try and lock in what the best way is to approach their setup with this, what we're considering to be really a brand new car. This is effectively a B-spec version of the car. New front suspension, new side pod design, new floor as well. Lots of things are changing. It's going to look visually different, and it's going to take some time for Mercedes, I imagine, to really understand what suits this new model best, regardless of what it says in the simulations. So I'm sure they would have liked, and the other teams bring an upgrade. The Ferraris, they were meant to bring a new rear suspension here. I believe they've delayed that now to Spain anyway, but Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri were also bringing relatively sizable upgrades this weekend, and they will not have the charts now to test those. Aston Martin, Dan Fallow says, look, the AMR23 is pretty good in all areas, but it's, obviously a significant step behind the Red Bull, and they're not bringing any major updates this weekend, or any race really. They're bringing the parts more progressively, but for Mercedes, it's a different story. Bringing a major update here was meant to be for Imola, and the question is now, will they delay it to Spain, or will they bring it to Monaco, which is, if there's any outlier circuit in terms of the design of it, Monaco is the one. But indeed, they will bring these new updates to Monaco that were scheduled for Imola, and they will be on the car. Probably the car was already ready to go, and therefore it's easier just to keep the car as it stands for Imola and take it along to Monaco, and they, I imagine, think, look, it will still give them some sort of advantage there. But Monaco is no doubt one of the most, if not the most unique circuit on the calendar. If you look at the overhead, you'd think, oh, some slow corners, some traction zones and everything, but it's just such a strange track in many ways. And even the higher speed corners, like turn 3, turn even 4 a little bit, it's so bumpy because it's on the streets of Monaco, and there's that tree kind of, routes that you have to avoid on the run down into turn 5, that it doesn't really, okay, it's a representative track in terms of the fastest cars will be fastest. Last year it was the Red Bull and the Ferraris just driving away from everyone at the front of the field. Then it was Alonso with the absolute train he was holding up behind him, because we know how Monaco works. But it's definitely not on paper the best circuit to test upgrades, in addition to the fact that it's Monaco. The streets, the walls are very close, right? It's very possible for you to get some damage, put it in the wall, and create some issues for yourself. So this is the concern that Mercedes will have bringing their new upgrades here, is that, are they going to get a great picture of how they perform? Do they work well in the lower speed corners? Do they work well in the higher speed corners? I'm sure they don't fully know, especially until they get to a circuit like this. And maybe even after the weekend, they won't particularly know. Last year, they brought that Spain upgrade. Last year, Spain was before Monaco, I believe. It worked well in Spain, and then they went to Baku and Monaco, and all of a sudden, there was a regression there. So it doesn't seem like, even if it is a big upgrade for Mercedes, it might not do much around Monaco. If it does, that's a big positive for them. However, 1 week after Monaco, we then go to Spain with the beautiful new turn 13, or reverted to the old turn 13, turn 14 without that stupid chicane that's finally gone. And this is the stereotypical Formula 1 test track, really. They've done practice here for many years. It's got everything you'd want, a very long straight, some slower corners, some traction zones, but also some faster, higher speed, front limited corners that Monaco doesn't provide. So it's interesting to me that Mercedes aren't delaying it. I believe the reason is probably because the cars have already been modified. It would be more effort to unmodify them and bring back the old version rather than just turn up with the new one, and any data they have will be valuable. But they've got to be careful that they don't turn up to Monaco, they see certain things on the data and they think, all right, sure, let's go down this route, and then it turns out they turn up to Spain or more traditional tracks, and what they believe was the case very much isn't the case. So it's certainly not the ideal race. You wouldn't usually see upgrades arrive to a circuit like Monaco. They usually turn up at an Imola or a Spain, or let's say a Silverstone, as I'm sure there will be more down the line for Mercedes and other teams as well. But we will see, it was meant to be probably today, we would have seen the first images of this. We're not going to see them, I imagine, until this time next week in Monaco, and how they actually perform on track is one question, but if Mercedes can figure out any way to actually get any of the performance out of them on track, that's going to be even more of a challenge around a circuit just like that. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Total Wolf has almost pretty much said that ever since the Australian Grand Prix, they haven't really found that sweet spot with the car. A good car is a car that the drivers are able to push and doesn't feel like it's going to do anything unpredictable, and unfortunately we've had that over last year and this year, and admitting now that that side pod approach was a mistake. There was an interesting analysis, I believe, from Mark Hughes at the race discussing how Mercedes got it wrong. Their car, if they'd have had this year's model and design at the start of last season, they would have been way ahead of the pace, and I believe that's what they expected to have. Last year, their rear suspension was playing tricks on them, causing the porpoising. They solved that with a brand new rear suspension architecture this year. That's dealt with the porpoising issue, and their car is obviously significantly quicker than last year's. But the fundamental problem is that they knew in their simulations that if they didn't have porpoising, their car was going to be quick, at least compared to the Red Bulls and the Ferraris of last year, and it would well have been if they didn't have that problem. The fundamental issue is, though, that by going for the zero pod approach and maximizing the amount of floor that's exposed to the ground and the amount of floor edge that's exposed, they can generate theoretically more downforce from the floor if they can have the ride heights that they want, which is what porpoising was, well, having an issue with last year. They decided to get rid of the side pods effectively to maximize the ground effect, but it turns out that aero philosophy is simply not as good as Red Bull's, which took a bit longer to come fully online, but is now clearly still the way to go with the undercut on the side pod, accelerating the air there. Okay, maybe slightly less floor downforce performance at its peak compared to what Mercedes can deliver, but fundamentally it's the better aero concept. So Mercedes got it wrong. They thought they hadn't got it wrong because their car was bouncing around, and they thought once they fix it they'd be good, and they've now realized once they have fixed it, the Red Bull actually have the better idea. And as a consequence of trying to fix that issue for this season, they had to push the cockpit a bit further forwards, and therefore Hamilton isn't happy. The car doesn't, he doesn't feel super connected with the rear end of the car. Problems to solve. This is going to be a big step towards doing so, they believe, but it's going to arrive at Monaco, where we're not really going to get a massively predictable picture as to what that might necessarily mean. Just one final comment here to close out the video from Yuki Tsunoda. I remember before the season began, there was comments from even, I think, Franz Tost and AlphaTauri that Nick De Vries was going to be the team leader. Yuki Tsunoda now says, though, he's the guy taking up the mantle, and absolutely so. He's really doing everything asked of him right now. He's good, good qualifying performances, very consistent, not being too angry on the radio to his engineers as maybe he used to be, still is to some other drivers, and is proving that, he's got what it takes, right, and has cut out the stupid crashes as well. So far, still feel like Yuki's got a crash in him from time to time, but he's definitely not doing the Canada 2022, for example, that we saw last year. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.